D-Day, Bob?
D-Day for what?
Decision?
No decisions.
No decision
What
yet?
are you telling them?
Just information today?
No information.
I'm Scott Garceau. I came to WMAR in September of 1980, and I stayed until the summer of 2008. At that time, Ted Patterson was here. He was Monday through Friday. I did weekend sports and sports extra, and then I was a sports reporter 3 days a week.
Two contrasting styles in this championship game tonight. Gilman, the more wide open of the two, they like to put it up. Pauly, they line up and come straight at you and say, here we are.
I started in Michigan, radio and then TV, when I was a teenager in my home area. And then I went to Albuquerque, New Mexico for 4 years, which I considered with, I guess, a baseball outlook. That was like AAA ball. And then I was looking to get into big leagues. I'd struck out on a job in Seattle where they interviewed me twice, thought I had the job, and was kind of taken back by the whole situation, you know, getting your expectations up and then getting them dashed. So a friend of mine that worked at CBS said, hey, there's an opening in Baltimore, I want you to send a tape. To which I said, I just went through that in Seattle, and like a big brother, he kicked me in the rear end and said, send the damn tape. And I did. I remember the interview. I spent some time at the station. They showed me around, and then they took me for lunch next door, which was Johnny Unitas's Golden Arm restaurant. We sat down for lunch, and about 15 minutes into lunch, John Unitas, who I wasn't a Colts fan, but he was the man. John Unitas was the man. John sat down at the table. They introduced me to him and said, Scott's here. We may be hiring him. And John spent maybe 15, 20 minutes with me, and we talked about everything football. And when he got up and left, I turned to Charlie Horick and Dave, our news director, and said, how much do I have to pay to work here? And I wound up staying for over 40 years now.
Let's take it to the veteran sports director of WMAR TV Channel 2. Here's Scott Garceau. Scott?
Thanks a lot, John. We look forward to seeing you as we sing Old Lang Syne.
Channel 2 at that time had both the Colts and the Orioles. Did about 50 Oriole games a year, and they did Colts preseason football and special Colt programming. I've always loved to do play-by-play live sports events, and still doing them with the Turkey Bowl here. I always said when I roll the highlights at 6 and 11, I know how they're going to come out. But when you go to a live event, you never know how that game, what's going to happen, what kind of stories you're going to have out of that game. So I think it was a chance not only to do the 6 and 11 sports and cover, you know, Orioles, Colts, later Ravens and Terps and all that, but to do those events live. I think that probably what interested me most.
I'm located here at the finish line area, and I'll be letting you know the names of the Preem Lap winners. These are special sprint laps, or actually mini races within the race.
By the time I got here, you know, I felt like I was established. I'd been around 10 years, but I was all of 29, so obviously there was a lot to learn. When I was coming up, there were a lot of impersonators of like Howard Cosell. You know, Howard was the guy you loved or you hated, but everybody watched him, and there were a lot of cheap imitations of him. And I guess I'd probably reached the point where you realize you have to be you. You can learn from others, and you can take things from others, but you can't try to be, if I was the guy screaming and waving my hands everywhere, that's not who I am. That wouldn't work, and I think people see through that. I got to deliver certain information. I got to tell you the down and the distance and the pitch count if I'm doing it on the radio, doing an Oriole game. That guy's really the personality of the broadcast, that guy sitting next to me, whether it's Tom or Keith or whatever. They kind of enhance the basic down, distance, score, timeout, commercial. You're the traffic cop taking care of all that. Now, I have opinions too. I like conversation. I don't like, you do this, you do that. I think a broadcast is best when you're talking like you and I are sitting at a sports bar watching a game together talking about it. And that's what I always try to bring out of that guy with me and say, listen, let's talk about this. You know, if you got some thoughts, and it's okay if we disagree on something too. And I think it's key for me as a play-by-play guy sometimes to ask the question that I know the answer to that guy, because 80% of the people at home want to know that. You know, what happened there? What did you see? Or how would you approach this when you played? Or, you know, to bring that, because sometimes players take things for granted that they did, but the listening or the viewing public goes, oh, that's really interesting. That's inside stuff. Yeah.
I mean, when
I was playing quarterback at Ohio State, we used that ride series all the time. You could pull it in, pull it out. And I had a fullback named Bob Ferguson. And I had to fight him to get the ball because he wanted it every time.
He was pretty good, too. That's a feel thing, though, isn't it, Matty?
Oh, yeah.
When I first came into the business, especially once I got to Baltimore, you're in a bigger market. The guys with the notepads taking notes, the writers would look at the pretty boys, they call it. You know, the TV guys would walk up with the camera, and you weren't on the same level because they were grinding, doing it every day, and you'd show up on the big story. But I think after a while, when you're around more, you kind of earn some of their respect too. And I laugh about it now because all the guys with the notepads are on radio and TV shows because you got to do everything now.
There are a lot of surprises up on the leaderboard this first day at the U.S. Open. People walk up, see the names of Thorns and Renners up on the scoreboard. Rather surprising. One name not so surprising, and a name that everybody asks, how's Nicholas doing? Well, Hall of Fame Day this afternoon in Canton, Ohio, and Hall of Fame night tonight at Memorial Stadium.
I love being a reporter and going after stories, not just reading scores and rolling highlights. And you develop relationships, whether it's a GM, other writers who cover the team, head coaches, assistant coaches, PR directors. You develop some kind of trust at some point where they trust you and they'll share information with you and know you're not going to be reckless with the information. And I think that's what I try to do.
Well, today marks an anniversary of sorts, not one we should celebrate. It was June 12th when the baseball strike started. Today it's July 12th. And yesterday when the talks broke off at the Doral Inn, things looked rather tense. We heard words like hostile, nasty to describe the negotiations. And it looks like the settlement could be a long ways off.
Strike in '81, I'm up back and forth to the Waldorf covering the strike talks, and Doug DeSensei was the American League player rep, and Mark Belanger was the Oriole. I may have that reversed, but they were two very key players in that. And I had trust of both of those guys. And I remember one night, strike talks broke off about 1:30 in the morning, and I looked at Belanger. There's a few reporters around him, and he gave me like, come on down the hall. So I went over, and I'm talking to him with a camera and a microphone, and a New York guy comes in and slaps the mic right in his face, and Mark grabbed his by the wrist like that and said, I don't think I was talking to you. And the guy walked away. But it's those kind of things where you build relationships and you can gather some information and do a better job reporting.
Scott Garceau is #1 with the National Sportscasters and Sports Writers Association. His peers have recognized him with their highest honor, Maryland's Sportscaster of the Year. Scott Garceau and Channel 2, Maryland's leaders in sports broadcasting. The memories are many of the Baltimore Colts. Decades of excitement. But that's all in the past. Now that approval has been given to build another stadium, the city's goal is to get a new NFL franchise. But the league's other owners have to support this expansion. Will they? Will the fans? And who's willing to buy this team? Scott Garceau tackles the questions behind the NFL quest. Beginning Monday night at 11, only on Channel 2 News.
A lot happening here at the meetings in Orlando today, Keith, and I think some good news for Baltimore. Let's start with the fact that the hospitality suite up the road here passed out 80 pounds of crab meat today as some 20 NFL owners filed through. Earlier in the day, more good news as NFL Commissioner Paul Tagliabue announced that a realignment and expansion committee has been formed to look into those two subjects. He said realignment would come first, although it would not occur in the next 4 years during the current television contract. He did not rule out expansion during that time. But the big story here today came at mid-afternoon when Al Davis, who moved the Raiders out of Oakland in 1982, announced that he would like to go back. So if the paperwork gets done and Al Davis indeed can move the Raiders back to Oakland, that's one more expansion site out of the picture. Phoenix, of course, was the hot expansion site. Of course, the Cardinals are there. Now Oakland seems to be out of the picture, and more, when we talk to people around here, including owners, they seem to think that when expansion comes around, Baltimore is at the top of the list. That'll do it for now. We'll be back with more at 6 o'clock. We'll see you then.
We made a lot of those trips where the NFL owners are meeting in Phoenix, and Baltimore would show up with their contingent, and they'd have their stadium diagrams and their chef with the crab cakes, and the owners would come in and have a crab cake and shake hands and You know, and we went through it.
A lot of people feel that the league will either go to Baltimore or Charlotte, but not both.
So there was a lot of flirting.
Back here, people are kind of looking, saying Baltimore or St. Louis, perhaps.
Yeah, I'm not sure people in St. Louis feel that way. I think people think that it's St. Louis, Baltimore, or Charlotte.
But I think at one point, Glendenning told the NFL, the deal was out there and everybody knew what the deal was, and it was a sweet deal, but the deal was coming off the table like within 12 or 18 months. The funds were going to be pulled. So at that point, I think the NFL said, we better get moving, and Art was the guy. Jack Kent Cooke didn't want a team in Baltimore. He's kind of got the market. No more than Peter Angelos wanted the Nationals, you know, in D.C. because he had some of that market. And I understand that part, but I think the league didn't want us, and that's the time I went up to Tagliabue. I was pretty incensed. Tagliabue's still on the stage. The press conference is broken up. I go up with a camera and say,
would it be best for them to forget about a future in the league or keep the passion? They bought the tickets and the club seats and the skyboxes.
And that's when he said, well, who am I to tell them what to do? Maybe they should build a plant or a museum.
We didn't force anybody to get into this process. We had 11 cities in initially. Some of the cities I mentioned were in the process, like Sacramento and San Antonio, and they were eliminated at an earlier stage of the process. We cut from 11 to 7 and then to 5. No one was forced to continue at any point, any more than anyone is forced to bid for the Olympics or forced to bid for a plant in their area. So that's a judgment people have to make. They can maybe they prefer to have a museum in their town or a plant. It's their judgment. It's not for me to make judgments about what communities want to do with their resources and their people.
I walked out of the room. I'm going back to the truck with that interview, and Ken Rosenthal, who's a columnist at The Sun at that time, walks past me, and I said, Ken, you're not going to believe what Tagliabue just told me. And I told him what it was. He said, can I come and hear that? And so we plugged it in. Obviously, that was his column, and it was headlines for us. And everybody in Baltimore was so down at that point. And then to hear the commissioner to say, who am I? Maybe they'd be better off building a plant or museum. And I can remember going to the first game at M&T Bank, which was called something else, maybe Raven Stadium the first year. And there were fans that had T-shirts with the stadium on it that said, hey, Tagliabue, how do you like our plant and museum?
I know what you went through 11 years ago, because that's exactly what's happening in Cleveland right now. And I am deeply, deeply sorry from the bottom of my heart. I express to you, with all that I can command, a commitment to make you proud of us, make you enjoy having us, and recognize the fact that we're a very important, integral part of your community, both on the field and off the field.
Art was this villain that, how could you take the Browns out of Cleveland? So he was nationally kind of painted, obviously in Ohio, but nationally painted as this villain, and I think unfairly when you look at some of the facts. But the first interview he did after he moved the team was with us. We got a one-on-one with him. It was set up down in the warehouse at Camden Yards, and basically heard from him the first time that this was really tough on him. They were totally invested in that city.
Well, just a dominating defense and a Super Bowl champion. The Ravens will chart out of Tampa about noon today and then let the party begin. More Festivus Maximus back in Baltimore.
A lot of things are unplanned. Like in 1982, the Orioles played the Brewers. Final game of the season for the pennant. It was Palmer against Sutton, 2 Hall of Fame caliber pitchers. And Milwaukee won that game. It was Earl Weaver's last game. And nobody left the stadium. The fans all stayed. I mean, crushing loss, right? The season's over. They all stayed. Earl came out. Earl, who doesn't show a lot of emotion, got tears coming down his cheek. He's waving to the fans. Wild Bill's doing O-R-I-O. That was so spontaneous, and it was so Baltimore. Like the last game at Memorial Stadium, Brett Hollander was talking to me last night. He said, I just watched on YouTube you and Mills doing the last game at Memorial Stadium. He said, I still get chills from it. He goes, you guys did such a great job. I said, no. I said, we just kind of sat there, and the pictures carried the day.
Here's
Here's a man who's worn the Oriole uniform in more games than anybody, over 70.
The Cal thing, you knew it was coming. We were counting, right? The numbers would change on the warehouse as he got closer and closer. And then 21-30 was a big night, too. They brought in all kinds of celebrities and baseball people for that, and then 21-31. So it was special, but you kind of knew it was coming, where some of the other things were a little more spontaneous. But that's a night any of us who covered it were in the ballpark will never forget. It was something. It was a record that was never going to be broken until Cal came along. 1988, I'm doing Oriole games, and that was the year the Orioles started 0-21. We'll never see that happen again. And there were guys on the roof, and Bob, what was the DJ 98 Rock? Bob. He was going to stay. Bob Rivers was going to stay on air until they won a game, and he had a cot, and he was sleeping at this. So I mean, it was national news. I'm out on the road with the team, and it's like 12 losses, 13, 14, around 15. It's the network guys are showing up from the Today Show, and it's getting bigger and bigger. We're in Chicago. They haven't won, and they're planning this welcome home. It's kind of like these guys are bums, but there are bums, right? And they start selling the tickets, and I'm telling guys in the clubhouse, I said, I've heard they got 30,000 tickets sold for that game. And then the next day I'd hear they've sold 37,000 tickets. And it was like 3-4 days out, it's like, it's sold out. They've sold out the stadium when you guys come home. Well, at that point, they're like 0-19, 0-20, and then they finally win. I did the game the night in Chicago that they won, but then we come home, and the stadium is packed. And I'm emceeing the pregame thing down on the field, and they have a script. I'm going to introduce this one and introduce that one, and then they come to me right in the last minute. They say, you're going to call on, I think it's Governor Schaefer at the time. He's going to come out and say something. Well, Governor Schaefer comes out, and he said, this is a fantastic night only in Baltimore. We love these guys. Win or lose, we're behind our team. And see that man up there, and Edward Bennett Williams, I think, died later that year. He said, that man and I today reached an agreement. We're going to have a new stadium in Camden. That's the day they announced the Camden Yards Stadium project. And later that year, Edward Bennett Williams died. I just remember that night, the stadium's full. The team was like, they had won, I think, one game. They lost. They were like 1-23, and there were 50-some thousand people at Memorial Stadium because, yeah, they're bums and they're horrible, but there are bums. That's our town.
Announced today that they have reached an agreement on a 15-year lease with 5-year option for a new stadium in downtown Baltimore.
About 3 months ago, Bob Irsay offered to sell 49% of the Colts to this man. Bob Welch, an investment tycoon, declined that sale and the transfer of the Colts to his city. Welch, who sought an NFL football team since the early 70s, doesn't think the Irsay-Indiana marriage will work.
Indianapolis is a unique city, and we did, the citizens of this community stopped supporting the Pacers with absentee ownership. And now there is local ownership, and they're being very well supported. That may say a lot.
Still no deal Friday when the scene shifted to Chicago. Pete Rozelle had called the owners together to discuss the Colts situation. Bob Irsay's arrival didn't give us any clues.
Is today D-Day, Bob?
D-Day for what?
Decision?
No decisions.
No decisions
What
yet?
are you telling them?
Just information today?
No information.
Although the owners agreed not to block the potential transfer, several spoke out against a move. The Colts owner slipped the press corps after the meeting, leaving Pete Rozelle to deal with the questions.
And he stressed that he had no firm deal with anyone. I can't speak for him. I only told you what he told us this morning, including the fact that he talked to Mayor Schaefer this morning. And he tends to talk further to the people in Baltimore, and that he had not made any commitment. But there's a possibility that he would move. I have great respect for the fans, their enthusiasm, and the way they've followed the Colts. They've shown intense interest in the Colts.
This is a pretty good story. An aside, Irsay was missing. Nobody could find Irsay. I got a tip. He's in Vegas, and when he's in Vegas, he always goes to Caesar's Palace. So I told our people, and they said, get on a plane. And off we went, George Stover and I, we fly. I'm checking in, it's middle of the afternoon in Vegas. Checking in, the front lobby is right there in the casino. The casino isn't that crowded, and I look over, and there's Bob Irsay sitting at a blackjack table with his attorney, Mike Chernoff, and two ladies. I'm not sure if they're with them or not, but there's 4 people at the table. So I tell George, I said, George, get over there and start shooting when I walk up. So he's unpacking his gear. He goes over by the elevators off to the side. I wait until he gives me the nod, and I walk up. Well, I'm not sure Irsay knew who I was. He did know me, but I'm not sure he knew at that point. But Chernoff turned white in his face, and I said, hello, Mr. Irsay. Hi, Mike. And Mike Chernoff just looked at me, and I'm making some small talk, making sure we're getting the video and everything. This is right after he was in Arizona with the governor of Arizona, and they thought they were going to move to Phoenix. Nobody had seen him since. And I'm asking Mike if I can talk to him, and he said, no, we don't have anything to say. And meanwhile, Irsay sees the camera off in the distance, and he goes ballistic. He's screaming and hollering, and pit bosses are running over. And I apologize and tell the pit boss, I said, I just brought him in. He didn't realize you can't shoot in the casino. Well, we knew, but we were violating the casino law. So they get up and leave, and the pit boss comes back over to me and says, you know what? He comes in here quite a bit, and every time he comes in, there's big commotion. The dealer did something wrong. He said there's always something going on. So anyway, that's it. We send the video back. At least we've spotted Bob Irsay. He's alive and well and sitting at a blackjack table in Las Vegas.
Don't add Las Vegas to the cities on Bob Irsay's shopping list. No, he doesn't want to play his football here, but I must admit his pit stops are improving. Oh, those people of Indianapolis were nice enough, but let's face it, the Indianapolis Inn isn't Caesar's Palace.
Hey, it's Jamie Costello. If you just enjoyed this episode of The Vault, you can check out more episodes by clicking on this box down here. And while you're at it, go ahead and hit that circle, and that'll subscribe you to WMAR2 News for great content every single day.